This is James Polikoff, and welcome to another episode of Breakthrough, America's leading podcast for actors, filmmakers, and writers. In this episode, we're featuring an actor, musician, who starred in only one movie, at least that I know of, yet he's had a very successful entertainment career. George Trullinger, and I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, he'll correct me if I'm wrong, is said to be the hardest working man in show business. You might have seen him on stage at the famous Las Vegas show known as Legends in Concert. And he's the perfect replica of Buddy Holly, does great impersonations of Ed Sullivan and also Mick Jagger. And as I understand, the Blues Brothers, but we'll get into that a little bit later. He also starred in a movie that I produced and directed. I guess I actually wrote that as well, called It's Only Make Believe. And I have to say that from that movie, I saw what a talented actor he is. So welcome, George. It's a great pleasure to have you, such a great entertainer, on this episode of Breakthrough. What surprises me, though, George, is you're indeed a talented actor. I saw that immediately when we interviewed you for the role in that particular role of playing Buddy Holly. Yet you chose to go live on stage as a music celebrity and impersonator and comedian. So what's amazing is, why didn't you pursue an acting career? You've got the talent. Why instead did you go in the direction you went in?
You know, that it's great to be with you. I have nothing but fond memories of shooting that movie. It's Only Make Believe. And you gave me a lot of latitude, Jim. You really did. And you let me just do my thing. And every now and again, I review that movie. And once you get over the sort of being self-conscious of seeing and the shock of, wow, was I really that young? I was just a kid in that. And but all the things, ironically, that I'm doing today, and primarily my main gig these days, although I do some singing and musical variety shows, my main gig is doing Ed Sullivan with a very talented group out of California called the Fab Four. And I took
the Beatles,
over
right?
The Beatles, yeah. And I introduced the Beatles, and I get to do some comedy, but I basically, as the show, when they play in theaters or performing arts centers, they do the whole costume changes. So my bit in the show is to bring them out, recreate the excitement of 1964, and then as the show moves along, kind of do my shtick with the audience and a couple of bits that I do so that they can get into their Sergeant Pepper suits and facilitate the costume changes. And that's kind of ironic because as much as I love to sing and play, that is just an acting. I think Ed Sullivan would be an excellent character for a biopic. They were very popular with the popularity of Bohemian Rhapsody and some other biopics that have come along. The Elton John Rocket Man, the Judy Garland biopic, which was really, really great. I've often wondered why they haven't done a movie. Maybe that's a movie you should do, the Ed Sullivan story.
Well, you never know. Actually, I saw your Ed Sullivan impersonation on YouTube, and I was impressed. I really think you do Ed Sullivan better than Ed Sullivan did Ed Sullivan. But, that's just my own personal opinion. You give it life and vibration, and maybe that's why people have shied away from doing something on Ed Sullivan, is because, he isn't known as an effervescent character. But we're going to get back to Ed Sullivan in a minute. Let's talk to the first time that I saw you in your phenomenal career. I think I caught you in the Las Vegas concert Legends in Concert, of course, and you were Buddy Holly, correct?
Yes, Buddy Holly playing and singing, and Jon Stewart, who was in the movie and played himself, really had a great concept for a show. It was really more like rock and roll heaven in those days. Mm-hmm. And his concept for the show that he said many times was, if the good Lord went to Elvis Presley and said, Elvis, get some of your friends together here in heaven and let's do a concert. That was really the basis of the show. In the first few years of the show, they were people that had passed away. And then as time went on, there were so many talented people who did live impressions, Dolly Parton, and at the time, Frank Sinatra and Kenny Rogers. Sadly, some of those folks have passed away. But
it was a great show, but I have to say that, and I saw the show several times before I ever decided to do the movie, but I have to say that the thing that always impressed me was the way that you did Buddy Holly. Can you take us back to a rendition at that time with one of your favorite songs?
Well, everybody has their favorites. That'll Be the Day, and everybody remembers. I tried to put energy in it. Johnny was very, very adamant about, hey, you're the first act in the show, and I just want you to come out like you're shot out of a cannon. And I was very, very happy to play rock and roll music, you know. If you knew Peggy Sue, then you know why I feel blue about Peggy. My Peggy Sue, well, I love you, girl. Yes, I want you, Peggy Sue.
God, I remember that, driving around listening to Buddy Holly in my car as a teenager. And I just, it was just fabulous you just sound just like it. You bring back the memories. Amazing. And you're still able to do it. He was a young guy, 22 years old, I believe you mentioned when he passed away, and yet you sound 22 years old. I mean, that's amazing that you can do it, because I know you put on a few years since then.
Yes. Fortunately, I live in Florida now, and I play at a lot of over 55 communities, and that's really the music that they love to hear.
Of course.
And we do a show, a little three-piece band. I show up with a three-piece band. We do a Buddy Holly section. And once we have done Buddy Holly and we're having fun, I get into some other impressions, Johnny Cash and Bob Dylan. And really, it turns into a request show. Hey, tonight's your night. What do you folks want to hear? And you always get somebody, Roy Orbison. And I work with guys that can just pull it out. And so every show's a little bit different. So we start off with the Buddy Holly tribute. That kind of loosens everybody up. And then it's like, what do you want to hear? We have a live show. I want to know if we have a live audience. What do you guys want to hear?
You're still the actor, George. There's no question about that. I mean, I hope that our listeners are picking up on that. The fact that, it's even though you're in the music and you think, well, it's just a music type of thing. It's not. It's not just music. It's not just comedy. It's acting. And we're going to get into that in just a bit in this podcast, because I want to direct this to actors and either others who, are trying to make it in show business, but haven't quite got there yet. What are they going to do? But anyway, we were talking, when I looked at Legends and got to know some of the characters there, some of them were almost, and I use the word almost, as talented as you, that were performing. Randy Frisky was doing
too kind, Jim. You're being way too kind.
Barbara Bogar, who was a terrific, Marilyn Monroe.
Oh yeah.
What was their story behind the scenes?
A lot of talent. I think what's important for your listeners, especially those aspiring to be entertainers. People often come up to me and say, "What do you do for a living?" Or if I'm traveling, "Oh, what is it that you do for a living?" And I always say, I'm an entertainer. I don't say, "Oh, I'm a celebrity impersonator," or "I do Buddy Holly," or "I do such and such." I always say that I'm an entertainer. And we all came from backgrounds. They call it paying dues. I've been in a rock and roll band since I was 12 years old. And that means tearing down equipment and loading into a van and driving to a gig and setting it all up and sound checking and tuning. And I've been doing this before there were tuners. Used to go to the piano and hit a key. Nun, nun, nun. Nun, nun, nun. And get tuned up. But you have to want it. And I've always wanted it. I've always wanted to be a musician. And when I was a kid in my neighborhood growing up in Orange County, California, on a Saturday afternoon, you could drive around these housing tracts with your window down and go up every couple of blocks. You'd hear in somebody's garage a band rehearsing. And that was me when I was, from the time I was 12 to had a pretty steady working band when I was about 16 years old. And we used to do the Battle of the Bands, and we would make flyers, and we would rent out the VFW and go to the beach and pass out flyers. And
Well,
all
you're
of it.
also another type of an actor, because I remember you telling me that you at Disneyland you used to do the
Yeah.
Jungle Cruise, right? Which is another form of acting, if I'm correct.
Oh, absolutely. And that was the days of Steve Martin. Steve Martin was the biggest comedian in the country, and everybody wanted to be a wild and crazy guy. Hi, folks. Welcome aboard the Leaky Tiki. My name's Les Capable. I'm going to be your skipper and guide for as far as we get. And that's you do that 25 times a day, 6 days a week, you get pretty good.
Well, I guess you do now. So you went and you were with Legends for about, I think you mentioned about 27 years, 28
Yes.
years.
Yep.
That's a long time to be with the show, but you continued with them. And then you went on your own. You started touring across the country, if I'm correct. And the first thing you did was Ed Sullivan, and what you're doing now.
I was actually doing Ed Sullivan. There was a gentleman, those of you familiar with the movie Pulp Fiction, there was a scene in the movie where John Travolta is taking the boss's wife out for a night on the town. And they go to a place called Jack Rabbit Slim's. And everybody in this nightclub is an impersonator, celebrity impersonator. And the maitre d' was Ed Sullivan, and the waitress was Marilyn Monroe, and so on. And the fella that played Ed Sullivan in the movie was a man named Jerry Hoban, and he was working with the Fab Four. And one day I get a call from Jerry saying, hey, but I need you. He always called me Kid. Kid, I need you to substitute for me at the Las Vegas Hilton, where Elvis played with the Fab Four. And I said, doing what? He said, doing Ed Sullivan. And my first reaction was, swear to God, I could never do that. Oh, no. Oh, no, I can never do that. And that's an important lesson. You should always, opportunity comes sometimes out of nowhere, right out of left field. I was still doing Buddy Holly, was still doing shows. And I was in Jackpot, Nevada, actually, doing a show, got this phone call. And my initial reaction was, oh, no, I could never do it. And he said, nah, kid, it's easy. Come on down. And I had a friend of mine who was a makeup artist. And I went over to his house. And he turned me into Ed Sullivan, showed me how to put my hair back and how to accentuate character lines and make myself up.
Some of the younger members of our audience may not remember. They weren't alive when Ed Sullivan was popular. But again, just to bring everybody into tune here, Ed Sullivan was the show. I mean, I used to watch that show with my grandfather, who loved Ed Sullivan and wouldn't miss a Sunday night that he was on. But every major act in the world was on the Ed Sullivan show. And he was probably the most famous spokesman on television at that time. And so, to recreate him, I mean, you were just a kid when he was doing his show. So, I mean, how did you get into the character? I mean, can you give us an example of what Ed Sullivan would sound like as you?
Ed Sullivan was a columnist, and this new invention called television came along. And most people don't know this. He had a newspaper column called Toast of the Town, and that was the name of the show. The Toast of the Town, starring
right.
Ed Sullivan. And after the first season, came on every Sunday night, and he would bring the best, I like to say, the best talent and some of the worst talent. The guys that would spin the plates on the end of the sticks, and jugglers, and of course comedians. But it was truly a variety show. And Ed, it's been said that Ed had no talent himself. He was a rather stiff and kind of his nickname was Old Stoneface. Mm-hmm. And he was, he was very awkward, didn't know what to do. Oftentimes, even though many times he was reading it off the cue cards, he would mess up an introduction. He introduced the Supremes. He forgot Diana Ross and the Supremes. Now the financiers, I caught their show, and I knew I had to have them right here. Ladies and gentlemen, here they are. He totally forgot. But he was a character that he did possess. And this is so interesting, and why I wish someone would do a movie about the life of Ed Sullivan. Ed Sullivan was born in Harlem. He was a twin, much like Elvis. His twin brother died shortly after birth. Could you imagine two Ed Sullivans? Just like the story of Elvis, two guys that looked like Elvis Presley. But at any rate, he grew up in Harlem. He interested in sports, always wanted to be a newspaper man and just couldn't break in. When he finally broke in, he had the toast of the town. So many people they just come out and say, I owe my career to Ed Sullivan because my life was never the same. I was on the Ed Sullivan show and he had the Temptations on. He had Diana Ross and the Supremes, Smokey Robinson.
The Beatles, of course, Elvis Presley.
Performers. Oh, of course. Elvis, the Doors, even Michael Jackson was on the Ed Sullivan show, the Jackson 5. So he was a cultural icon. And so I began to read everything that I could about him. He was always interested. He was one of the first people way back in the 50s to appreciate the power of the teenage dollar. So he would meet people on the street and he would talk to the teenage kids and he would say, who are you listening to? What records are you buying? And they would say, and he would write it on a piece of paper and he would give it to a secretary or a talent person and say, find them, find out about them. If they got a record, we need them on the show. So
I can see, George, you're already writing the script. You know, I think you're almost there. You need to put together the script so we can talk about doing a movie. I'm getting more excited about that now that I hear it. But let's move on.
I wish someone would. I really do.
But how'd you go from there?
Me. Everybody thinks, oh, you want to star in the Ed Sullivan story. I would like someone to do it, even with a big name actor. So one of these method guys that would really capture his role. He really was an architect of show business and coming up in a great period of time when there was a lot of talent and music. We actually have agents and studio executives who listen to this podcast. So maybe someone's going to pick it up. And later on the podcast, I'm going to let people know how they reach you in case someone says, you think you might get together with one of our writers and write the script? I think it's great. But let's go on. I want to find out with Mick Jagger, how did you make that transition to becoming a
Mick Jagger impersonator?
Again, it's I sort of have a character face, and I can look like a lot of different people when I dress up as the Blues Brothers. I'm I'm not a spitting image of Dan Aykroyd, but I'm tall and I have a thin face and I can do the voice. And same with Johnny Cash or well, I hear that train a-coming, running round the bend. I ain't seen the sunshine since I don't know when, but I'm stuck in Folsom Prison. Time keeps dragging on. Whatever you're doing.
You just brought him back to life.
But I've been fortunate, and I like to do a show. I do a show here in Florida where I start as Ed Sullivan. I do 5 characters in one show. And I have a partner named Tim Stamper, who's up in Myrtle Beach right now doing Legends. He does John Belushi in a Blues Brothers team up there. And he does the Big Bopper and he does Joe Cocker. And we go out on these cruises and just have the time of our life.
So with Mick Jagger, how did you learn Mick Jagger? That's a tough one.
Watching a lot of videos. In fact, I'm in my studio. I've got a whole box. That's another thing that I've been doing with the COVID lockdown. I have a box of beta tapes and I had nothing to play them on. So I found the first beta machine. When I first started making a little money in Las Vegas, I went out and bought a Sony Betamax. And I still have it, but it was broken.
Still alive. Oh my God.
I sent it to a guy in Texas and he totally redid it. So now I'm looking, I call it my time machine. These videos are nearly 40 years old.
Oh my goodness.
I'm looking at myself and all the people, and sadly, like so many things, a lot of the people in them have passed away. But I have these images. And Jon Stewart has contacted me. He's friends, with Steve Martin, and he wants to do a movie about how Legends came about. He has asked me to write that. I don't know if I can do it or not, but I know a lot of the great stories of how we started. How nobody gave us much of a chance. The only other impersonators in Vegas in 1983 were guys dressing up as women.
I remember the story about Johnny Stewart, who was the producer of the show, Legends in Concert, going out into the streets when you first were doing that show, pantsied out handbills, putting them on every car, giving them to every person walking down the street. and you started, and I think they gave you 1 month to, I think you mentioned they gave you 1 month,
Yeah.
And that was going to be it. And my God, the show today is still going on, as you mentioned, in Myrtle Beach, et cetera. Now,
Yes.
George, I have a question here. We have a number of actors and even filmmakers, writers who are listening to you. And by the way, some of the writers who are listening to this podcast, might decide they want to get a hold of you and write that story about Ed Sullivan or something else like Legends in Concert. There's a lot of fabulous history and great color stories that can come from that era and even today. So if you're an actor, for example, and you're in between roles, you haven't done that much, you get a role here, a role there, but not enough to really keep you going, not enough to make your rent, for example. Is there any way if someone, an actor, writer, et cetera, has a great voice, a talent, is there any way they could break into the field of impersonation and music and that sort of thing? Or is that all
I think there is. And a good friend of mine is here in Florida. And of course, so much has changed with COVID. Last year, all bets were off. All concerts, baseball games, sporting events, graduations, conventions were just off. And coming up here in September is he hosts the Sunburst Convention of Celebrity Impersonators. And it's been quite famous. Jay Leno sent a film crew out. And I hope you can appreciate this, Jim, because when you did It's Only Make Believe, you were immersed in our world for a little while. We are real people. And this is a real industry, like plumbers or car salesmen or any profession that has an annual convention where people get together and network and share ideas of how to increase their business or how to sell their product more efficiently. We have a convention called the Sunburst Convention. And all different levels, people who are just starting, people who have, like myself, who have been in the business a long, long time. Legends started in 83, but I've been an impersonator since 1980. It's been a long time. And there's a degree of respect. There's certainly camaraderie. There is networking. There is tax tips, how to incorporate. It is a business.
So someone could break into it if they have talent.
Absolutely. And I urge you, if you have an act, you've been told, hey, you kind of look like somebody. And we have some people who do. There's a great guy that does George Carlin, and he's really good. And a friend of mine who does Don Rickles. He's the #1 Don Rickles impersonator in the country.
Well, I would imagine there are many other possibilities like that are modern day figures, such as a Beyonce.
Sure.
I mean, if someone has that kind of talent that can have a similar look and have a voice that can match. I mean, where do you learn how to do this? If you're, for example, an actor, how do you learn how to do what you do? I mean, or do you just have to pick it up?
I think the Sunburst Convention, being around other like-minded people, I went to one of those conventions. It's been going on for, I think, 18 years. And they always have me. I'm usually on the road, but they usually have me come in and do the showcase. They'll invite agents and talent bookers from Florida and the area. And we get people that fly in internationally. There's a guy that does Boy George out of England who's really incredible. And one year I think there was 5 or 6 Elvises and a couple of Marilyns. And one of the popular characters is Captain Jack Sparrow, the pirate from the Pirates of the Caribbean movies.
Sure, Johnny Depp role.
Oh yeah, Austin Powers, and it's just a wild thing. Maybe you can look that up. Greg would be a great guy to have on your podcast. Some of the ridicule comes from like a really bad Elvis impersonator, or somebody people would make fun of.
Well, with actors, for example, business. George, they can go to an acting class. They can learn from an instructor, how to act, how to meet their marks, etc. But how do you learn how to do what you do?
I think a lot of it has to come from just it being your dream. How did Marlon Brando learn that? Of course, there's acting classes and method acting or techniques. Public speaking, it's good to enunciate. It's good to have, I told you earlier, I was kind of a natural mimic, mimic other people. That's one of the things we used to do backstage at Legends. When you're backstage and the show's going on, some of the legends could do other legends. Everybody could do Elvis or Neil Diamond or
as a matter of fact, I think I heard you do Elvis once.
Oh yeah. Everybody does it, doing everybody's act. Or you make funny lyrics out of the show because you hear it. It's like a soundtrack over and over, unless there's a new act or something. But I think I would say to your listeners who are thinking about show business, listen to your inner voice. Don't let anybody decide your dream. No matter what it is. You want to be the greatest chef. If you want to be an architect, I would say that. And I say that to young people all the time because well-meaning, well-intentioned adults often squash or try to squash a dream. Oh, you don't want to do that. No, that's nothing but heartache. No, you'll never make money. You'll never do it. A lot of that, speaking for myself, came from that. I remember auditioning for a school Christmas pageant and being thrown out, singing Jingle Bells or something. And that had an impression on me. And I said, by God, I'm going to be a singer. I don't care what, I never played in the high school band. I never played, but I always had a rock and roll band. My dad taught me how to play guitar. And it's a passion that you have for it. You want to play music, that's what you're going to do. You want to be an actor. If you go to the movies and you see yourself up there or you find yourself able to do that, of course, get out into a community group, acting classes. There's all kinds of things. Improvisation.
Yeah, these are very encouraging words. I mean, I appreciate it. We're kind of coming to the end of time, but more importantly, there can be a producer out there, a writer who might like to get together with you, possibly an actor who wants to learn a little bit more, maybe a booking agent who's looking for fresh talent, a studio executive who thinks, hey, there's an idea for a movie. How do they get a hold of you, George?
My email is probably the easiest. I could give out my phone number, area code 702-510-3888. That's
well, I don't know if we want to give that out, only because you might be hounded by all kinds of people that you may not necessarily want to be speaking to. But I'll tell you a better way. I thought of that.
I give my business card out all the time, so I'm a pretty easy guy to find.
Well, and I know people can Google you, and there's quite a bit they can find out just by Googling you. But definitely one way that they could find out on our Breakthrough podcast website, we're going to have a little bit about your bio, but we're also going to have a way that people can get a hold of you if they want to. So again, one of the things that we want to point out is simply just go to our website, which is, again, very simple. Just remember the dash. It's Breakthrough Podcast, but you want to put a dash in there between Breakthrough and Podcast. So breakthroughpodcast.com. And I'm going to give it again before the end of this particular episode. But you can find out about George a little bit more than we've talked about today. And at the same time, you can get a hold of him, particularly if you need a talent. I have to tell you, this man has reeks of talent, and he has been for so many years. I'm just very impressed with his career. In any case, George, I want to thank you for being with us. And maybe we'll have you back another time, because I think there's a lot more you have to say to people who are interested in show business.
Follow your dreams, kids. It's the best. It's the best thing for your heart. It's the best thing. And I think we're going to see, in closing, we're going to see a resurgence of entertainment. Once the country, we're opening up slowly, and I hope, hopefully wisely. People are starved for entertainment. And I know me and my fellow entertainers are just dying to get back out on the road to entertain everybody.
I think it's just a matter of time if the country does what it needs to do and continues to do that. George, thank you so much. I just thought it was an unusual guest. I realized that and George is such a talented individual, but I did want to give our audience an opportunity to see that there are different opportunities out there in the entertainment field. And maybe some of these opportunities might just hold you over until your dreams can come through. But again, to find out more about George, past podcasts that we've done, future podcasts that we're going to be doing, just visit our website, www.breakthrough-podcast.com. And be sure to insert a dash between breakthrough and podcast. Again, breakthrough-podcast.com. This is James Polikoff, and you've been listening to another episode of Breakthrough, America's leading podcast for actors, filmmakers, and writers. Please join us again. Thank you.